Next up, we have our next panel, which is how to effectively translate cyber risk into business risk for the board. And I'm very thrilled to introduce our next speakers that are going to be joining us here for this panel, Scott Hutton and David Emerson. So just a quick introduction. Scott is a former Marine and a leader for the InfoSec program for the current leader for an InfoSec program for a $20+ billion real estate firm. He has a deep understanding of how cyber attacks work, and he focuses on security that matters to enable business outcomes instead of hindering growth. We're also joined by David Emerson. David is the CTO for Soul Cyber Managed Security Services. Throughout David's career, he's been recognized for driving value for organizations, customers, and employees. He has accomplishments in solving complex infrastructure challenges for large organizations, bringing down operational costs while keeping high performance expectations. David will be serving as our moderator for this panel alongside Scott. So, David, I will pass it over to you.
Hey, so it's great to be here today, and it's great to be here with Scott, especially beyond being an experienced practitioner and leader in the field with all of his experience in multiple industries, retail, software and services developers, financial services, and whatnot. I've talked with Scott before, and one of the things that I really like about him is he's practical. He's the kind of guy that, I could see building a program that's actually effective and not just a bunch of lip service. So hopefully this is a good discussion, and good to have you here, Scott.
Thanks, David. Thanks.
So let's start with
I need to update my LinkedIn after that introduction.
Let's start with the easy stuff. We know that it's not easy to translate novel threats, and there's sometimes esoteric mitigations into like decision points for the board. So how do you help a board assess and manage risk just at a high level? What is your kind of go-to strategy there?
I'm sorry, you cut out for just a minute. Say again, David?
Yeah. How do you help a board assess and manage risk? Like how do you identify what is your go-to sort of formula for, pipelining risk and assessing it for the board in a way that they can understand?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Boards have kind of changed over the years, but I think a lot of it is moving away from, here's the risk and here's the threat, and going into measuring protection levels, right? That's at the end of the day, that's kind of what we care about, and we get boards that are asking those questions. And so I try to tend to focus more on what is our protection levels on something. So for instance, ransomware came into play years ago. Boards were asking questions about it. And there's really three things you have to focus on to influence or affect a risk reduction in that area. And so, backups, phishing, external exposures, and then detection and response capability. So if you bucket those up and then say, this is where we are on this journey, right? Yesterday, we were focusing on keeping secret data secret. Today, we're focusing on better phishing controls, protecting the perimeter a little bit better, becoming more efficient at detecting the type of tools that we know ransomware folks are using with, and going through that path there. That seems to be a little bit better route. I know earlier on, the analogy I give is the hurricane, right? A lot of people would sit and talk about, is the hurricane coming? And when the hurricane comes, what's going to be the damage when it hits the land, it hits the storm? And now it's more focusing to, hey, the hurricane's there, it's coming. Do we have the wood? Do we have supplies? Do we have water? Do we have a generator? Do we have the stuff? How prepared are we for that incident when it comes? And I think that's really helped shape and kind of remove some of the naysayers, although I think most boards now understand it's not if, it's when. But I think that's been really the key measurement for me is here's the threat, here's the risk, here's how well we're prepared to handle this, hopefully.
Yeah, and when presenting that program to the board, do you always characterize your efforts in a common framework like NIST, or do you structure your story in a more targeted, bespoke manner? How do you put that together?
That's a good question. I think Dick and Theo kind of said it earlier as well, that my background actually is I spent over a decade in the credit card industry, and so I was heavily regulated by PCI, and that's some of the things kind of helped shape my view and vision of security today. Is you can solve for compliance and you won't be scared. If you solve for security, you'll generally be compliant. And So for me, I actually am not too excited about talking about frameworks, and I'm shifting a little bit on that just because so many people are starting to say, hey, we want that. That's what we see. And it's a laborious conversation to say, hey, tell me where deception is. Tell me where really effective human education and security awareness training comes in on the NIST model, right? It's just a few notes here and there. And so I try to stay away from that. Doesn't mean that I don't get in that. Me personally, when I go in an organization, I like the CAG or the top 20, and I'll use that to kind of look at our maturity. Where are we today? Where are the things that we can change that will vastly improve our security posture? So I use it in the background. It's just kind of a framework to help me prioritize things. But when I'm communicating about security, I try to talk about what they're seeing on the news, what they feel is happening, and how our organization is prepared to handle that type of threat and that type of issue.
And presently, either at your current role or at a role that is recent and at hand in memory, what specific metrics did you find especially influential or comprehensible to the board? And how often did you share those?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I've tried to shift away from. I know KPIs for a while, people were talking about how many events we handled, how many reported phishing we got, how many events were mitigated, and even mean time to detection to me is not a valuable KPI to share with somebody. If you told me, hey, Scott, our mean time to detection is 15 minutes. I have no relevance to understand how good that is or how bad that is. You say, oh, we blocked 100,000 attacks this month. There's no framework. There's no understanding. Is that good? Is that bad? Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? And so I try to focus on KPIs that tell a story about where we are and where we're going. So around security awareness training, right? If you do a really good job of knocking that out, you get some great metrics. We can say, hey, in our industry, there's a thing called a resilience score, and we're 5 times better. We're 10 times better than our peers. And a great example is if you map that out over time, when we went into COVID and lockdown or remote work, there was a concern that, hey, people are at home, they've got their dogs next to them, they've got kids, they're being school teachers, they're doing these 7,000 things. Are they going to fall apart on phishing? And we do, monthly simulated phishing attacks and this and that, like almost every organization does. But to have that data there to say, hey, our score, this baseline score that we started measuring 2 years ago is about the same, is a good measurement to have. It's even a better measurement. If it goes down, you can say, hey, people are working from home, that score's gone down. How do we course correct and go through that? So I like KPIs that tell a story over time. So instead of saying my mean time to detection is 15 minutes, in the last year, we've decreased or increased our mean time to detection, right? Because it's about how are we providing a service? How are we getting better? How are we improving in relation to the threat? So again, take your threats to the highlights, and under that, what are the pieces you have to have that make that threat become mitigated?
Yeah, it almost sounds like you're promoting the notion of a meta metric or some kind of a synthetic that rolls up into something actionable. How do you form that? Is that a collaborative process, or is that something that you just sort of meditate in a room for 5 hours and come out with the relevant actionable items?
I have a lot of very smart people that I work with. Or that I know, and let me bounce ideas off them. And that's typically how I get a lot of those type of ideas. And it gives you a great peer review. So, some people in the organization I find are actually pretty good at this is actually general counsel. General counsel is very good with understanding risk, communicating risk. Talent, I think Dick said the same thing earlier, talent or HR department's really good at understanding that. And they can help you build metrics that really have a meaning that come through. I think as the threats change, those metrics have to change to adapt, but you're exactly spot on. And I try to stay away from red or green, because if something's red, everyone says fix it. And then now you're personally on the line to fix something. Well, what if it's something that's outside of your department, outside of your region? You're trying to encourage an organization to come on the journey, and you've got that one group that just doesn't want to come along, and they have a red dot, and everyone says, Scott, go fix that. I need this person to come on the journey with me. And so I try to kind of stay away from that and give more broad stuff. And they can be used as gamification as well. So a huge fan of showing KPIs. This is how this department is doing. This is how they're improving. This is where they're at. And then frankly, publishing them, right? If The executives see this. There's no reason the people directly responsible for influencing that change should know about it and see it and have some sort of competition around that. Phenomenal. Good luck with sharing scores and having people be competitive, which I think, almost everyone is in this industry.
Yeah, it makes sense. And that fits quite well with Dick's promotion of, an organic approach to establishing security culture, the recruitment of one's organizational peers, just kind of co-opting various functions. And I agree. I find general counsel to be an excellent resource specifically in that regard. They tend to have not only a logical construct for how to view an organization, but also, they're just outside of their own head on the technical aspects. So they're not mired in exactly how you would implement these solutions, which is helpful. How do you share your metrics? So once you've got this report, you mentioned that you share it broadly. You mentioned that sometimes it's helpful to inspire competition. What is your pipeline for sharing the metrics to the organization, whether that's execs or board or whatnot?
I think for me, and I'll kind of go back to security awareness because it's something I'm super passionate about and really enjoy doing, and have had a great turnout on it. Is we find out how do we get a measurement that directly ties to managing that risk, right? This is the risk. What's something that can evaluate very easily to understand how we're doing there? So for phishing, how many people fall victim? How many people report it? Because at the end of the day, we want people to report phishing as well so we can react. So I try to do good and bad. I've seen people focus in on, I just want to know how many people fail. And that's not a good picture of the overall risk and threat we're seeing. It's not just how many people fall victim to it. It's how many people report it and catch it, because then the Security Operations Center can go back and mitigate the risk. So I try to get KPIs and measurements that kind of do both. And then I'll shop them around, typically inside of my team, my organization, some friends. And then we'll start measuring them up, let them run for sometimes months in there. And then we'll roll them up to CTO, CIO, CFO, get feedback, positioning there. And then typically before we go above that, we'll speak to, in our case, I like to share regions or departments over time. So we'll go to department heads, share them with them. I don't want anyone to get on a blast somewhere and say, oh my gosh, I'm at the bottom. I didn't know that. Why didn't you tell me, right? That hurts relationships. And we're here to partner and help people improve. And so if it's a stacked order type of thing, I'll always reach out to the people in the bottom 50% and say, hey, here's our score. Here's how we're doing. How can I help you improve this score for the department you run and own, and give them ownership of that. Once they've had that opportunity to look at it and hopefully improve and change, or at least initiate change, give them a good response about it, then I'll just start sharing them an email blast. Sharing them when I speak to people. Any opportunity I get, if I'm in some sort of department region or giving a presentation, talking to different departments, I always pull up that stat and say, hey, just so you know, here's how you're doing. You guys doing great. Keep up the great work. Nothing else to do here. Hey, you've slipped down to the bottom 50% here. Can I help you? Here's some examples where you had challenges, and just try to keep fitting those in and constantly selling the idea around the different KPIs to the people who can drive and influence change around, especially when it's around behavior. Yeah,
that's sensible. So, okay, pivoting a little bit into something that's perhaps a much harder issue, and I think one that's difficult to talk about openly, but probably helpful, is when you're faced with a cybersecurity risk, a lot of boards and executives prefer to simulate mitigation through half measures, right? You're faced with a risk that requires a minimum quantum of investment in order to successfully mitigate that risk. And you get something slightly less than that requisite activation threshold of money, right? Like you get maybe a quarter of what you wanted. And that isn't an allocation sufficient for an effective solution. So how do you ensure that resource commitment is sufficient and not merely a down payment on a cargo cult that is just going to, kind of waste resources and also not mitigate risk?
Yeah, I think you have to have a well-defined handoff, right? I'm asking for money. You're going to give me, a security person, and potentially IT or some other organization, help them shore up some problems, instead of spending money on marketing, advertising, human talent, all these different areas. So you have to almost, I see it as a covenant. This is the challenge we're in together. Here's the business problem, the challenge we're in. And for the right amount of money, we can eliminate it or come close to eliminate it. We can mitigate it minimally. And I think having those conversations about, what is your threshold? What is your tolerance, right? I think a lot of times security people, and certainly myself years ago, we see something and the only solution is to mitigate it entirely or as close as you can. You can never mitigate entirely. And so I think having those open conversations, kind of an A/B situation about here's what $1 million does, here's what $5 million does. And this is where we are. And it might be, hey, 1 million today, 1 million next year, 2 million after that. As long as you have an open communication about, we understand that we're not fixing this problem. We're starting the mitigation journey and going through that. And then you develop your KPIs, your measurements about how that is happening. You can say, hey, we've gone from, yellow to green. We've gone from high likelihood to medium likelihood to low likelihood, and continually go through that. So I think on the occasions where you don't get full funding on something, I think being very open and transparent about, hey, out of that, let's pick these few things to go after, measure, see what the impact is, and then come back is a fairly honest and straightforward way to go through that. I don't know if I answered the question though, David. Sorry. Kind of wandered.
Yeah, I think you did. I think one follow-on that I would have there though is how do you evaluate what would be a minimum necessary investment to mitigate a particular risk? Like, let's say you've identified, the risk of vulnerability to ransomware attack, and crypto ransomware attack is very high at a hospital. It's very sensible to take some measure to, get rid of obsolescent software at that hospital, or get rid of admin access or whatnot. And you have identified that it will require at least $100,000 investment, in the next month in order to really secure any kind of reasonable response. And spending less than that would be tantamount to not spending any, like not actually mounting a response at all. How do you establish that level in a credible way with the board, and then secure the minimum necessary funds? I mean, I'm not necessarily saying, you're going to solve every problem or reduce it to a low likelihood of occurrence in one fell swoop, but attracting even the minimum necessary amount of funds is often a challenge.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Getting money for everything you need all the time. I think there's a couple of things you can, again, kind of present the two things, but if you said, hey, to evaluate that minimum necessary, a clear picture on the wall. What is that target that's actually going to move the needle? And that's something I think even security people have a hard time understanding, is what's that target that's actually going to impact security. It comes from experience, talking to peers and friends. So for the example that you gave, we know that dramatic changes and how much time you have between when a patch is released and next exploit. I think it's down to about 46 days now, which is a dramatic change from where it's been. We're still seeing 0 days, but sometimes there's just other mitigations you have to have for that. And so you've got to go to each set of people responsible for that. And so let's say that you have in the hospital frame, you have a surgery center, and that surgery center, the people responsible for that say, hey, it's $20,000. We need these tools that allow us to do it. And then this department does this, and this department does that. If you cannot get the money you need to do everything at once, you say, okay, let's prove this theory by giving me the $100,000, which is enough to do the surgery center and the cardiac care, full stop, that's it. We're going to put that money there. We're going to measure it. We're going to show the demonstration of risk. And once that's been proven and done, we're going to make a covenant to come back and get more on that. And a lot of times it's just, I think we've made mistakes about, hey, we're going to fix this risk, give me money. We don't actually fix the risk. We can never fix the risk. The risk is still there. And so you have to be able to say, hey, today it takes the cardiac department 70 days to patch. And we have 46 days on average. We want to move that below 30 days. We want to move it to 70 days. Here's the price tag. Let's do it. And you go, hey, look, we've done it. We've done it. Here it is. Let's provide the same level everywhere else. Because if we care here, we care there, don't we? And I think that's probably the better approach. Me personally, I tend to stay away from all or anything, right? I want to show some sort of value on the money and continue to make forward movement on it. But there are some times where, hey, I've got to have an EDR solution. You've got no money for it. This is the outcome, and how our joined vision is going to change because of that, right? We don't want to be spending money, disruptions, potentially liabilities in our hospitals for this. So I think that gets into kind of a tricky area. If it's just you got nothing. Oh.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Okay, so I've got to give a little context to this one, but I learned a term recently. It's actually a couple board meetings ago I was at, a board meeting where someone came up with the notion of a pigeon member. I think it's a brilliant term. The pigeon member dumps tasks and problems upon the meeting and flies away without participating in the solution. Much like a pigeon might make a filthy mess of a public park and bears no responsibility for the cleanup. So let's reverse roles a minute, because I've seen a lot of pigeon members in my time. And we're going to put you in the role of a board member, right? And say, instead of presenting to the board, as a board member, what do you do to drive real change? Like, what do you do to not just be the irritating security voice that's promoting something they can't actually resolve?
So if I'm on the board member, if I'm on the board and we've got a pigeon security person, I love the term. I'm gonna start using that. So I think it even happens, I think, in security where there's only so much we can directly influence change. We've got to work for someone else to go through there. And a lot of people are excited to make it security's issue. Patching, typically not security's thing. It's up to an IT organization, a business to allow it, applications to be built to support it. And so you've got to drive that change there. So I think as a board member, if I'm getting that from a CISO, there might be tough conversations in all reality. That's not how it works. I sit on the board of trustees for a small foundation, and I want to hear what we're doing to fix something. So to me, it's just very transparent. Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, here's the problems. How are you going to help the business through these problems? And just very direct, very straight, and to the point. I'm not going to. There's a Harvard study about the monkey on the people's back, right? I'm not going to let you put the monkey on my back. You've aired it out there. What are you going to do to fix it? And sometimes it's aired out because you just want to get it out, and you think airing it out to the board is going to fix it. But how are you going to fix this, and what do you need? And typically the latter, what do you need? That's when you get, well, I need participation. We need to rebuild systems so they can be patched in available time. We need the tools, we need the people, and you go through all that stuff as well. So it's just almost a kind of a zero tolerance. And then you've got to get to how are we going to fix it immediately? What are you doing? What do you need? And go through that.
And organizationally, do you believe that companies and their boards are structured appropriately to resolve these issues? You bring up the point that perhaps patching is not actually a security issue, and I completely agree with you. I think that many risks and issues in cybersecurity are mischaracterized as like belonging to some ivory tower of security practitioners who can actually do nothing about the thug crime of ransomware, right? Which is a hygiene problem. And so, how do you influence the organization of a company, or how do you navigate as a board member to the appropriate person to solve that problem? Like, is it more appropriate perhaps that a COO would own patching? Or is it more appropriate perhaps that, you have some consortium of operations and finance and the leads of departments who, are responsible for patching their own things and ensuring that they're not running obsolescent software? How would you influence organization as part of that paradigm?
Dave, that's a great question. And it's something I've thought about, how boards have kind of changed over time, and hopefully they're going to make a change too. Well, they'll have folks that are cyber excellent, cyber security practitioners, business people, you and I, people who understand what it takes to actually mitigate and manage risk, sitting on boards. And so they can ask those tough questions, right? We know a lot of times if things aren't getting patched, it's probably not security. It's probably not even IT. It's probably the business saying, no, you can't patch, or no, you can't patch, and no, you have no windows, or hey, and I felt that in my career, early in my career, hey, we have to patch the system. It can just never go offline. It's credit card processing system. Okay, well, we need money to build it to support that. That's your requirement. And so it's commonly not IT. So I think for people that live it and breathe it and have been through it, I think if you start getting those people on the board, I think you frankly have to turn straight to the CEO. You're at the helm. You're responsible for this. How are you enabling this? And if the CEO is like, I didn't know about this, or I don't know, talk to the CISO, there's a little bit of disjoin there, right? Hopefully that's not what's going to happen, but I don't think there's a lot of CEOs that understand why something may not be making traction in a direction, right? So I think you've got to hold the people who can influence the change accountable. I always tell people security, my security organization is 100% aligned for detection and response. I mean, we have to be world class in that. But as far as driving outcomes around patching, security awareness, we've got to help build a program, but then we want to build a culture around it, and that outcome is going to depend on everyone else around us. And I think if you start holding accountability down that path, things will change and change quickly. It's the same thing in production, right? You might have supply chain problems, you might have other issues that are not the responsibility of the people on the line assembling the goods or your widgets. But as a board member, I would love to see a dramatic change where security is not the CISO. Security is the CISO, the CEO, the CFO, the CEO. This is a joint responsibility we all care. And you as a C-level, you understand the challenges your CISO is facing, and you're helping them solve problems and go through that. Because then everyone's on the hook. Everyone understands security is my responsibility. Here's how I can enable it and make it better. But it's completely rose glasses coming on. But I do see a day there's going to be people who have worked and practiced through this that understand the challenges and the hurdles that can very quickly help drive responsibility in the right direction to get things fixed.
And in a modern sense, with modern infrastructure, you're so much in the public cloud, so SaaS-based, a lot of companies are owning less and less. How do you manage the dilution of responsibility and governance, while still like having an effective security program? I mean, it's very easy to not merely dilute one's responsibility organizationally and pass the buck. Today, it's almost imperative to dilute one's responsibility infrastructurally, right? You're effectively passing it to AWS or using the SOC 2 of Azure or whatever to satisfy your own governance requirements. So how do you hold an organization accountable despite that?
I think for the security practitioner, we do this with third-party reviews, right? I've done third-party reviews where people are in AWS, and they give me the SOC 2 Type 2 from AWS. And you say, okay, that's great. Your hardware is secured. What are you doing about your application? Oh, well, they test all this. You've got to have those open conversations. I think a lot of times people don't know that is the hardware layer, and that's it. What are you doing for everything and above that? How are you going through that? And it's one of the things that I see as a great opportunity. Sometimes when people take things into the cloud, they may not understand they're on the hook. And it might be weird, but as a security practitioner, if the cloud can enable the business to move faster and you can't do it on-prem, more cost-effective, all this other stuff, it gives you more control. So you, as a product manager, you can have a better outcome. Go for it. Now sit with the product manager and say, hey, part of this responsibility that you've assumed by going to the cloud is you're doing A, B, and C. How can my team help you with that? How can IT help you with that? How can we get in line? Because you may not recognize all these things come with that. And so it's about raising the awareness around that again. And a lot of times it's, oh, man, that's a lot. Oh, your IT people can help do that. You've got people who do pen tests. You have people that do evaluations. Oh, you can put it in front of web application firewall and dramatically reduce the risk for this type of thing. A lot of times people are open to that. But if you go in there with, you're doing this bad and this is wrong and you're making life miserable and hard, of course you're going to put people on the fence. But hey, this is a wonderful thing you're doing. It's great. We've got to do these other two things. Can I help you with that? Can IT help you with that? Who can we get to help you out with this and go through that?
Cool. Okay, what didn't I ask that people need to know? Got any closing remarks? You able to hear me, Scott?
I guess my voice may not be coming clear. Sorry.
Oh, there. Yeah. No, you're better now. So, just in closing, what didn't I ask that people need to know? Just we've got your wealth of experience and pragmatism here.
The world's changing. I think we're in a great, wonderful place where boards are asking better, more focused questions out of us. And I think it's time to take advantage of that. I know for years, boards didn't see cyber as a business problem. They saw it as an IT problem and just kind of go over in the corner and fix that. And I think boards are recognizing that now. And it's really an opportunity to apply change that's going to matter and make a difference. Don't just go through, like Dick said, Leo said, and Theo said, and you said, don't just go through a framework and check the boxes. Give them money, get money, tell them what you're doing with it, and then show them how you've done that and how you've made that change to the organization. So I see it as a kind of like the golden era of cybersecurity. I mean, it's never been on a higher radar for executives and board members. And if you know how to apply security that matters, you can make a huge difference in an organization. If you kind of stick to a framework, and can't show a definable, this is the risk reduction, this is how we've managed it, how we've prepared for this, you might have a bit of a challenge.
Cool. Thanks a lot for your time. This is a wonderful discussion, and really appreciate getting a chance to talk with you.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone.